Welcome everyone for today's second Tuesday. Today we're covering tips for interpreting print data, which really gets down to troubleshooting. And I will be popping in and out of the presentation as we go to show you how these concepts of interpreting the data can be directly applied within ChromaChecker. Please feel free to ask questions at any point. This will be recorded. It will be up on our website. And I do want to remind everyone about the Color Quality Conference coming up at the end of January, because this will be a couple sessions that we're going to cover at that conference. So hope to see you there. So in terms of our agenda today, quality, as we all know, is a very ambiguous term. So ideally, we should define quality as what's sellable versus not sellable, because what we want to do is print sellable work. So we get paid. And E-factor is the metric that helps us really understand what's close enough for your customers. Everyone's customers are different in terms of how close is close enough. So you get to decide using an E-factor what's close enough for your customers. And so if a print fails your desired expectation factor, your E-factor, meaning it's not sellable, ideally you want to fix that printer as quick as possible to get that printer printing sellable again. And we all know that depending upon the type of printer you're dealing with, it could be a very inexperienced operator on that printer, because we are all having a tough time finding people to work. And so that person working on that printer could have been doing something completely differently in a different industry last week. And so we need to make it simple for them to understand what needs to happen to make that printer sellable again. And so as much as we can, we'll automate the interpretation of the data to help make it sellable and help the operator understand what they need to do. And you'll see we've already done some of this within ChromaChecker, as you'll hear in today's presentation. In this way, ChromaChecker can interpret the data to help the operator understand what they need to do to the printer to get it fixed so that it's back printing sellable color. Now, a little bit of review for some of you that have been with us. I apologize for the next few slides, but it's important to set the concept here. It's all about print that isn't sellable. So if we've got prints, let's say print labeled 1 on the right side, it was printed last week, and then this week we print number 2. That level of difference, you'll see if you look closely, there are 2 different oranges there. That might be acceptable within your E-factor, but obviously number 3 is not acceptable. And FYI, these are actual prints from actual printers trying to match a Grackle reference. And you can see the printer that did number 3, and by the way, we've all heard of the printer that printed number 3. I won't call them out, but it's shocking how different it can be. So back in 2017, over 6 years ago now, we did scientific research to quantify what level of E-factor people are accepting of. And we published this data in TAGA, and we found that if the E-factor is less than 3, almost everybody accepts it. If it's more than 8, almost everybody doesn't accept it. And if it's between 3 and 8, that's what I call the finger crossing zone, or the danger zone, where you cross your fingers that what you're printing, the customer is going to accept and pay for. And unfortunately, most printing is done in this zone. So there's a lot of finger crossing that the color is going to be right. And if it's not right, then someone has to do something to make it right. And Beth, there's a couple people waiting in the waiting room. If you can let them in, please. Now, if we think about things in the way of a dart target, where the bullseye is, let's say, Grackle or ISO-coded, if you're in Europe, you want to plot how close your printing devices are printing to that bullseye day over day. Because every printer has a certain amount of variation in terms of how different that printer prints day to day. Some devices have more variation than other, which is directly related to how much maintenance and preventive maintenance you apply to the printer. And in this way, we can quantify how close each of these devices are matching that given reference that we're aiming for within an E factor. Because I'm sure many people have had two prints both match ISO coded, or both be G7 compliant, but when you put them next to one another, they don't look very close to one another. And so you're asking, okay, which one's right? If they're both G7 compliant and they look very different, which one's right? And it's not so much which one's right, because they can all be G7 compliant and still be 6, 7 E factor different from one another. It's which one's most right. And the one that's most right is the one that has the lowest E factor to your given reference, which in this case is Grackle. Now, having the Ideal Lines pin on, this is important, but it's also important to understand how close the printers are printing to one another. So you could have two printers both passing G7, both be within, let's say, a 3 E factor of Grackle, which, as we talked about, is acceptable to virtually everyone. But if one's the proof at 3 E factor and it's in the 9 o'clock position, and one's the press sheet and it's 3 E factor in the 3 o'clock position, that means they're going to be 6 E factor to one another. And 6 E factor, you're back in that finger crossing zone where oftentimes it's more important to have printers matching one another than it is matching Grackle. That's why I'm taking off my Ideal Lines pin when I say that, but it's important to be able to know how close these printers are to one another. And if the printer is wrong or beyond your E factor expectations, why is the printer wrong? What do we need to do to make it back into an acceptable E factor? So is it that something in the printer slowly wore out? Is it something suddenly broke in the printer and it's way out? Is it wrong consumables, meaning wrong paper or ink? Was the file not built correctly? So if the file wasn't built in a Grackle color space and your printer's printing in a Grackle color space, but the file was built in, let's say, a Gravure color space, when that file hits the printer, it could look horrible, but the printer's printing perfectly. But because the pre-press wasn't done properly on the printer, it wasn't put in the right CMYK color space, it can look horrible. In fact, the printer's perfect. And so it's important to have the pre-press set up right. In addition, someone might have changed the RIP configuration. So they took off the input profile being Grackle, telling the printer how the printer is supposed to print. Someone might have turned it off or changed it to another reference, which causes the printer to print wrong. So it's very challenging for an operator to understand why it's wrong. And no matter why it's wrong, you want to get it fixed. So there's strategies that you can implement as color champions within your companies to help figure out what's wrong with the print. And we're going to share many of those strategies with you in today's presentation. So first key thing is, what if there's something wrong with how the imaging is printing, how the printer is imaging color within the page? And by the way, every example I show here out of ChromaChecker is a real life customer example. And this is a scenario where if you look over at the blue spikes here, this is checking the within sheet variation. So if you have a target that has duplicate patches, like our CC84 target, ChromaChecker automatically compares the identical patches with one another and calculates the delta E difference of those patches that are on the same target. And in the same way, you could have multiple targets on the same page, group them, and ChromaChecker will automatically compare what the delta E differences are between those patches within the same page. And if the number's too high, it tells you you've got a problem with the printing device. And in this case, you can see that the E factor of the printer is fairly high by the blue line on the left, because this blue line in your timeline represents within page uniformity. You'll often see this with offset presses, because offset presses have multiple key zones with duplicate solids of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black in every key zone. And if the press operator didn't level off the press nicely, you'll get pretty high light blue lines in your timeline telling you that the press operator didn't balance the press out very well. So by going to the purple horizontal lines on the bottom of the timeline, you can change it from an E factor view, which this is, to a CMYK view. And when I change to a CMYK view, this is the exact same data I was just looking at in CMYK view, and I can see instantly that the black unit of this digital printing device is imaging black very differently within the page. And this had to do with the black drum being, shall we say, worn out. And therefore, it had an 8 delta E difference of how it laid black down on the page. And what was happening is on one portion of the page, the black was dark, and on one portion of the page, the black was very light. And unless you had a target with multiple black patches on it, you never would have seen this. But with the CC84, ChromaChecker saw this, and it allowed the operator, albeit the printer ran this way for about 30 days before the users looked at this. And so actually, I looked at this and I told the users, okay, when you see this happening, you need to go in, look at your units, see which unit's imaging poorly, and then troubleshoot that unit depending upon the make and model of press. That tells you what you need to do to fix that unit, i.e. in this case, the black, to bring it back into a normal range, which you see down below. So this is a common situation that we see with printers, in that they have a within sheet variation issue and it needs to be fixed. Now, the next thing I like to talk about is related to profiling. Everyone talks about when a profile is no longer valid. And by the way, were there any questions related to that last scenario? Because I can show it real time if you want to see the data in ChromaChecker. Anyone want to see the real data in ChromaChecker and how I isolated the data and looked at it? In fact, you know what? Let's just do it. I get tired of PowerPoint. So let's actually go into the cloud and show you this. So we're going to go into the ChromaChecker account. And this was happening on this color press. This is all real data, 389 files. It's about a year worth of data. And here's my data. And you can isolate the data. So I'm clicking on the purple box and the amber box and the red box. And now you see the time period from February through middle of March where this idiosyncrasy was going on in terms of the within sheet variation. I go to that purple, I go black primaries, the primaries. I can isolate the black alone, and you can see the high delta E's on the black. And if I were to go down to the actual data, you can see that as I scroll down here to the beginning, you see the 6 delta E, 4 delta E, 4 delta E, 3 delta E, all on the black variation until there's a 6 delta E, here's a 6, until that maintenance event was applied. And the maintenance event, which we're going to talk about in a minute, is represented by this gray vertical line. And this gray vertical line shows that if I hover over it, you'll see that the drum of the black was replaced, and that obviously fixed the problem that was happening here, and we're back on track. And so as we see this type of idiosyncrasy with certain types of printers, we can, if you can imagine, with all this data, we could start to understand what's going on and actually tell the operator what they need to do to fix it, rather than them knowing enough to do what I just did and looking at the data to know how to fix it. So that's a really powerful capability that ChromaChecker has built in, so we can see what's happening. So let's go back to our presentation. And the next thing we're going to talk about is tracking when the profile is no longer valid. People say, oh yeah, the profile gets stale and you have to reprofile. And everyone's like, well, when should I reprofile? And if the printer's all of a sudden failing in a big way, do I need to reprofile? And so many times it's like, no, you need to fix the printer before you reprofile. So from the beginning, within ChromaChecker, we built in the ability to track not only accuracy, meaning how close is the printer hitting Grackle, so think of that dart target, but oftentimes, more importantly, how close is that printer matching itself from when we first set it up to match Grackle? So we've built this ability to have a baseline, and the baseline tracks the consistency of the printer. And ideally, you build or you define a baseline every time after you've immediately verified that your G7 curve is working or that your ICC profile is working, because immediately after building an ICC profile or a G7 curve and implementing it into the workflow, that's as good as your printer is probably ever going to print. So that at that point, we say that verified print at, let's say, a 2.5 E factor is the baseline. And then every measurement after that point, ChromaChecker is not only comparing the measurement to the reference like Grackle and giving you an accuracy E factor, but it will also automatically compare against the baseline to give you a consistency E factor. And in this way, you can track when that printer starts drifting off beyond your E factor expectations, telling you it's time to reprofile the printer. So let's go back into ChromaChecker, because I think this is such an important aspect. And by the way, these columns over on the right of your data will show you the accuracy E factor and the consistency E factor once you've set up a baseline. So let's pop out of the presentation again, go back into the cloud. We'll go back to that ColorPress 2. And when we look at the ColorPress 2, we're going to go back to these purple lines and reset it to show me my E factor. And when we go to the E factor, we can see that if we just look at isolating our accuracy over time, you can see the accuracy started out at about 4, and then it started drifting. It went up to 5, and then it started going to 6, and at times up to 7, and then it was kind of bouncing up and down. Well, this green line tells us the customer's E factor was a 6. So about 50% of the time it was failing, and 50% of the time it was passing, probably around here. And here it's more like 70% of the time it was failing. And if we take a look at, even though they fixed the within sheet variation, if we look at the baseline, so this gray line here shows when the profile was built, around February 1st. And so the baseline was built in February 1st. And that first week of February, the printer was about 2.5 E factor from the baseline. And it stayed kind of in that zone, drifted up a little bit here, but it's pretty much stayed around 2.5, 3 until about a month later. And then it started migrating up to 3 to 4 to 5. And you see, once it starts climbing, the accuracy moves with it. And so ideally, they should have reprofiled this printer around April if they would have known better. But they didn't know any better. They didn't know how to look at the data. They were brand new to it. And I didn't look at it until October. And I'm like, oh my God, guys, you should have reprofiled this thing back in April. but you can see they reprofiled it in October and brought it back down. But this baseline feature helps you understand when you need to update the profile, because the device has just naturally drifted over time. Enough consumables have changed that it's changed. Now, how do you make a baseline? Well, let's say I just reprofiled the printer and I have a whole new set of conditions. I can take a couple prints that are good prints, and I can do it off of any number of prints. I could do it off one print or multiple. So if I take multiple, just to show you how easy it is, and I hit on this group that says baseline, I can say make a new variation baseline, set it as the current baseline, and I'll say new profile, what is it, December 12th. And I say confirm. And now I've just built a new baseline for this printer. And any print that comes in after this point, this software will automatically compare the print to Grackle, because that's what this queue is set up for. And it will automatically compare the print to the baseline to tell me what the drift is of this printer over time. So this becomes invaluable to know when you need to update your profile. Any questions on that? If not, let's get to the next scenario within our presentation. And this is just the screenshots of what I just showed you, so that if you want the presentation afterwards, you can have the presentation. Just let us know via email that you want the PDF of this presentation. The next thing is paper. Paper is the #1 reason why printers fail. And it can be failing because the manufacturer of the paper is giving you paper that's different from the paper they gave you last week. It could be your print buyer, your paper buyer at your company is always looking for the special of the week. And so the paper that you're getting is moving all over the place, and management doesn't understand that paper is the 5th color in 4-color printing. And if the paper's not consistent, the print's not going to be consistent. So these are things that we need to educate our company on, that, hey, if you want a tight E factor, the paper's got to have a tight E factor. And the ink can change as well, but paper is far more the culprit in terms of problems. And here's real life data from a large format printing device. And you can see, for the most part, this large format printing device, the accuracy represented in the amber line is pretty consistent across the 400 measurements here. But you see spikes going up. And these spikes are over 60% of the time due to the wrong paper being loaded in the printer. And so, in addition to tracking the consistency of the printer over time, with every measurement, ChromaChecker can track the consistency of the paper over time. And when you see these spikes, like you see on this graph, this gray line represents the color of the paper on every measurement. So with every measurement, ChromaChecker is checking the paper. And if the paper falls outside of a tolerance that you determine, it can automatically send a message to the operator saying, hey, looks like you loaded the wrong paper. And you can have it actually sent to the person that's buying the paper, so that the person buying the paper can get an alert saying, hey, the paper on indigo #4 is failing color compliance. You might want to check into this, because if the paper is not meeting the manufacturer's specifications, that's a big problem. And I'll tell you, I had a customer about a year ago tell me that ChromaChecker saved their bacon because they were able to prove, using this ChromaChecker substrate inspector, that the manufacturer, which I'm going to call out the manufacturer by name, it's 3M, which you would think 3M is making very high quality paper for the large format industry, but they had a hiccup there where the paper was not meeting 3M specifications, and the customer was able to prove it with ChromaChecker and actually get some relief from 3M for the paper being wrong. And with ChromaChecker, all you have to do is set up the paper in that you're using within the substrate inspector. And we have videos on how to do that. And then once you've set that paper up into substrate inspector, you can actually put a tolerance on the paper independent of the print track. So if you take a look here on this Color Press 1, you see over on the right, there's a substrate category and there's a red number of a 4.1, which is the E factor of the paper. And on the right of it, the printer's at a 7.3. And ideally, many of our customers have this dashboard of all their printers up on a 70-inch screen on the wall. So all the operators and managers, when they're walking by, they can look up and see how every printer is performing. Green is good, red is not so good. Yellow means it hasn't been checked, so it's kind of an unknown state. So this is a motivation for all the operators to make sure their printers are as green as they can be, as often as they can be, because everybody's looking. And everybody understands that everybody's got their own responsibility and they all have their own paddle in a boat. They're all in the same boat, i.e. the company, and they're all rowing in the same direction. And I've had so many owners tell me that they've hugged me after the company's implemented ChromaChecker, because all the finger pointing that was going on before it went away when everybody sees their responsibility up on the screen. And it's not just the printer operators that responsibilities are shown on this dashboard. In this case, I'm showing you the paper. So if the paper vendor was wrong, it shows on the dashboard. Temperature and humidity shows up on here. The plate shows up here. The lighting shows up here. So if there's secondary variables that affect how the print prints, which all these secondary variables can affect how the print prints, they will be shown up on this dashboard to make everybody accountable within the shop that it's printing correctly. Now, just to show you this quick, let's go back into ChromaChecker. And I'm going to go back to the cloud. And within this track, I would go to my preference. And in my preference, you'll see there's a substrate library. And when I click on the substrate library, this is showing me all the substrates that I've measured within Substrate Inspector. So using ChromaChecker Capture or using a third-party product, you can measure the substrate, upload the data into ChromaChecker's Substrate Inspector. It then becomes in the library. And then within the track specification, you link the substrate to your track. And once you've done that, then every time you do a measurement, ChromaChecker automatically tracks the substrate in addition to all the other variables it's tracking. And you'll see that's this column. So this column represents the delta of the substrate. This column represents the delta of the within sheet variation. This delta shows the baseline variation. This delta shows the accuracy variation. And then the E factor is whichever one's the biggest, which gives you the overall yay or nay, is the print sellable. So that's how Substrate Inspector works. I hope you guys are using Substrate Inspector to track your substrates as part of your normal routine when looking at color, because substrate is that fifth color in 4-color printing, and it's critical that it's consistent and it's correct.
Hey, Dave.
So, yes, question.
We have a question. Can you show us how to set a tolerance for a substrate? And I'm sorry if you already covered that.
No, I actually didn't show that. So the tolerance for the substrate, it's a great question. It's kind of a deep question. So I'm glad for whoever asked that. You'll see in tolerances, if I go into my tolerances, I use a tolerance for digital of different E factors. And so if I look at my E factor sub 5, and we go in and we look at that E factor, you'll see that there's a substrate tolerance is part of that. This tolerance doesn't, this E factor sub 5 doesn't have a delta tolerance on the substrate, but I can add it by just coming in here, putting in a value of what I'm allowing the substrate to be, and then clicking on this normative. Clicking on this normative will cause it to, the whole sheet to fail. Keeping it off normative will show me that the substrate is more than 2.5, but it won't fail the sheet just because the sheet passed anyway, which is rarely the case. Usually if the sheet fails, or if the substrate fails, the sheet's going to fail anyway, because again, the paper is such a critical component of that. So that's how you add the substrate tolerance to your process. Hope that answered the question. Let's get back to the presentation. Any other questions while we're doing this?
Not right now.
Okay, so let's go back here. So that's what gives you that red icon here in the substrate. Now let's go ahead and go to the next instance, which is it the workflow? Did the workflow convert the file correctly? Well, we've got a number of customers that have advanced to the level to put both RGB and CMYK patches on the same color bar. The reason you do this, and by the way, ChromaChecker Capture Inspector allows you to configure color bars with RGB, CMYK, even spot colors, and extended color gamut colors. So if your printer prints with a orange, green, or violet that you have direct access to, you can put that on your color bar to assess how well the printer is printing those. But by having RGB independent of CMYK, if the RGB is correct and the CMYK is wrong, meaning the RGB passes but the CMYK values fail, that tells you something's wrong with the printing device itself. Whereas if the RGB patches fail and the CMYK patches pass, then you know there's something wrong with the workflow configuration, meaning the way that the RIP is converting the color through to the output process, it wasn't converted as expected. So many companies don't take RGB files from customers and print them directly. But more and more people are, because as long as it's a defined RGB file, it gives you more flexibility to have more gamut, more toward the end point of printing and giving you better color. So if you're processing RGB files as part of your workflow for direct printing, having a color bar which has both RGB patches and CMYK patches is extremely valuable to understand that both the workflow is converting color correctly and the CMYK print engine is imaging color correctly. So within the Capture Inspector, you see I have a screenshot here. The first, 15 patches that are shown on this list are different combinations of RGB to a given reference, such as sRGB, that I set up within the ChromaChecker track. So within the ChromaChecker track, I can, in fact, it's just as fast for me to show you this versus talk you through it. So let's go into the physical print condition of, let's say, this printer. And you can see here I have the ability to set my CMYK aim point, which in this case is Grackle, but I also have the ability to set my RGB aim point here. So in this way, I can have both a CMYK aim point and an RGB aim point. And in this way, ChromaChecker knows to compare the CMYK data against the CMYK reference, which is Grackle, and it knows to compare the RGB data against the RGB reference, which could be sRGB if I'm using sRGB in my workflow as my source color space to convert the color from. So in this way, ChromaChecker can do both RGB and CMYK. And while we're here, we'll just go to Capture Inspector and show you that when we're building a control strip, I've got a control strip here called my CC84 with RGB. As I go in here, you see here's the RGB patches, here's the CMYK patches. If I want to add another RGB patch, I can just go in and I can say edit this target and add a new RGB of 100, 0, 100. And now I've just added a new RGB patch on this control strip, and you see it's added it right here. And then I can save this control strip, I can scramble it, I can change the orientation of it, I can mirror it, and I can save it as a PDF and with any patch size and any layout, so that it works. Now, if I'm doing a label, I might want this more of a square shape, so I can put it in a label hole so that, by the way, the CC84 works like a P2P, so you can iterate your G7 curves extremely accurate off this target. So it's significantly smaller than a P2P, but it gives you 100 times more flexibility in that you can mix different types of patch values on here, format it the size you need it to based on the instrument. So if you have 2mm exact, it can be much smaller. If you have a 8mm or 11mm spherical instrument because you're printing on fabric or you're printing on foil, these are scenarios that ChromaChecker can accommodate with the CC84 so that you can measure it correctly and get the data you need to use to do what you're wanting to accomplish. So let's get back to the presentation.
Can I ask one more question? How do you control your or where do you control your spot library? So if I'm going to switch to M1 and I want to go to Pantone V4,
Yep.
How do you control all of that?
So in your assets, you have your libraries. So you can import your libraries. So here you see I've got my Pantone V5 M0, V5 M1. You just import the libraries that you have available to you, or you can make your own libraries. We also have something called ChromaSpot, which, you know what, we need a separate session right on ChromaSpot, because ChromaSpot, you can read about ChromaSpot. That's probably best thing. Go to manuals and type in ChromaSpot here. This is our custom library that we've built within ChromaChecker, all spectral, all M conditions. And it's scientifically, numerically intelligent. So just by having the number of the ChromaSpot color, you know what color it is. So like an N36 is a gray. 8R4 is a bright red. So once you start learning these names, it's a very robust color library. None of the colors are less than 3 delta E different from one another, so you don't have a bunch of repeating patches and so forth. So did that help you in terms of where to find the library and what you can do to add new colors to the library?
Yep, perfect, thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. So let's go back in and get this running again. Next thing is maintenance events. Oh my goodness, so many people don't use the maintenance events that are available within ChromaChecker. This maintenance event function allows the operator to document what they did to the printer at any stage. I mean, ideally, something prints out wrong and the printer scratches his head, the operator scratches his head and said, okay, let's change the corona wire. So they go change the corona wire. Didn't work. Then they go change something else. Didn't work. Then they do something else. Or maybe they change 4 things at a time, heaven forbid, because then it works, but you're not sure which one of the 4 things they changed made it work. So with ChromaChecker, we've built the ability for operators to enter numerous maintenance events. These are for both conventional presses and digital presses. And it's actually device specific. So for instance, if I choose my device is a wide format device, I have head cleaning. But if the device is an Indigo, you don't have head cleaning as an option in the Indigo, so that's not an event that you can choose. And by entering these events, like I showed you earlier, that gray line with the new profile being built, that's an event. And you see over on the left, I have a blue check box next to the new custom ICC profile. And there's, of course, a new G7 curve. So in this way, you can document along the timeline every time you iterated the curve or iterated the profile or did a nozzle cleaning or what have you, to see what type of maintenance is required on this printer to keep it running in a sellable condition. So in this screen, I've got the large format settings. Here's my HP specific settings. If you look over in the lower right-hand corner, you see an HP has ILE accuracy validation. That's a function on the HP. And, you know, we're pulling data automatically from the print OS of HP, including ColorBeat. And we're working with HP to have them transfer the maintenance events from the HP DFE into ChromaChecker. So soon you should be able to see that. In fact, if you own HP Indigos, ask HP that, hey guys, you want the maintenance events to be able to flow into ChromaChecker. It might help their engineers work a little quicker on this. But in this way, the events could someday come over automatically, so the operator doesn't have to document it, do it both in the HP DFE and then do it in ChromaChecker and say, I did it, it'll carry over. And we've got an API for this. So if there's any print manufacturers on the line here, feel free to ask for our API, because we're not exclusive to HP. We're willing to work with everybody. And then there's checkboxes here, because depending upon the operator, you can check which ones you want the operator to record and which ones you don't. And the events can be entered via the cloud or capture. So within capture, here's the Xerox specific events. In capture, the lower right-hand corner allows the operator to enter the events. So if I were to flip over to capture right now, here's my capture, and I'll just log in as me. If I use my right name and password. So as what am I doing here? That's funny. Oh, I know. Wrong password. Here we go. So with the right password, this lower right-hand corner allows me to say, hey, on the Inca, I go to this. Now here's daily print head maintenance, print relinearization, bleed ink filters, head cleaning, head replacement, nozzle. I can go ahead and mark any of these and put any notes in here and send, and it will now register in the cloud that I just did a maintenance event on this printer. So very flexible. If I go to the cloud, so if we go into the cloud and show you this, so we'll go to our Inca, and you'll see here, I can say add event, and here's the same events that you saw within the capture software. So the administrator can enter the event, or ideally the operator should enter the event, and then it will show up on the timeline as, in this case, a printer relinearization. So this is really great, because now you're associating a problem with a solution. And this is what we need to start using artificial intelligence to put these things together to prompt you on what the problem is ahead of time. So you don't have to necessarily interpret the results. You'll know what the results are based on the vast amount of information that's within the ChromaChecker cloud. Because we have data on thousands of printers, and we've learned specific scenarios that we can provide guidance for. And we're asking our users for more help, because in this way, we can put more scenarios within ChromaChecker to help provide these automatic hints on what they need to do to fix it. So for instance, today, we have this active. I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen this, but if your color bar that you've printed out of your inkjet printer, the three of the solids are at the right densities, and the tints of those solids are at the right densities, but one of the solids is light and all the tints are light, ChromaChecker will submit a message to the operator saying, alert, whichever nozzle, in this case, the magenta nozzle appears clogged, please clean the nozzle, clean the head. And we're at the point where we can put a PDF of how to clean the head within Capture, or a link to a cloud for the instructions on how to clean the head of an Arizona versus an Inca versus an HP. So in this way, not only is this brand new operator getting a message that the certain nozzle is clogged, but they're getting a message of how to do it, which is really incredible, because now that operator can fix that printer and get it back up and operating very quickly.
Hey, Dave.
Yes.
We have more of a comment, but it says we would like to be able to print a device maintenance report and add to automated reports, add to suggestions. Think I already have. Oh, also user created event names so we can customize like your user flags.
Excellent. So today the events are not editable by the customer, but we can edit them, and we can do it very quick. We don't need our programmers to edit it. It's like a third level programmer that can do it. So typically we put events in the system really quickly. If you have your own private instance, so with ChromaChecker, most of you are running off of a public instance, but our bigger customers have paid more money and have a custom instance that allows them to have custom defaults and custom references and custom substrates and custom events and custom videos, things like that. But either way, it's very easy for us to add them today. We hope at one point we're going to allow our customers to add them, but it's a function, as I shared, not many customers are using yet. Hopefully this type of knowledge will get more of our customers using it. But just give us an email, send it to me or support@chromachecker.com asking for these types of things, and we can put them in the system. And you'll see in a couple slides, we also have what I call checklists, like a pre-production checklist, which which we've implemented today on a certain level. Like for an inkjet printer, if you have a user set up as a basic user, when they load Capture, it reminds them to check the temperature and humidity. And if you don't already have a data logger capturing it, and I'll show you this. And it also tells them to do a nozzle check. And then if they say, yeah, I did a nozzle check, it's all good, then they're ready to go. Where if I'm a more advanced user and I log into that same printer, it doesn't ask me these questions. So within the accountability in ChromaChecker, you can set the level of user and customize what kind of message they get or checklist they have to go through to ensure that that printer is printing in a sellable condition today. These are capabilities built into ChromaChecker today that unfortunately a lot of our users don't know. So I encourage you guys to learn more about it. But these are things that we can easily customize for you and add to your system. This slide talks about auto-generating G7 curves. So with the P2P target, which we can lay out in a 2-row or a 1-row format, you can imagine with an inline measurement device, which we're partnering with some different companies that are building inline measurement devices. It measures our CC84 target in seconds, and if it fails, ChromaChecker can automatically build a new G7 curve, save it in a given file format, put it on a directory, and then the RIP or the color server can pick up that curve, automatically load it, so the next file through has G7 applied to it. This is being done today. We've got numerous customers doing it today. In fact, I've got customers doing it with the EFI, with Epsons, with the inline Spectro. So ChromaChecker automatically saves out an EFI VCC file, and EFI automatically loads that VCC file in, so the next job through gets it applied to it with no operator intervention. So these are very exciting capabilities that we've implemented that help, again, keep that printer in a sellable condition. Now, here's my request to submit data and solutions to us to help us enhance our database. So if you know, hey, I know when, well, the example I'm showing here, I blacked out the printer name because this is a type of printer we work a lot with. And this is the data that ChromaChecker shows the measurement before the printer broke. And you see it's a 3.4 E factor. All the solids look good. All the dot gains look good. Now the very next print, which was about 4 hours later when they verified the printer, you can see if you look, the yellow dot gain is like upside down. It's like an upside down curve. And this happened a number of times over a period of about 5 months. And we were able to figure out, based on the technician going in there and having to troubleshoot it, and then he figured out, oh, I did this. We were able to go on the logs and we said, oh, when this happens, this is the, I'm going to make this up, but a photomechanical assembly in the yellow unit that needed to be replaced. And now we know for this make and model printer, when we see this, and this inverted TVI on the yellow can happen on any of the colors. It can happen on the black, magenta, or yellow, but or cyan. But we say, hey, your cyan photomechanical assembly needs to be replaced. And again, this may be something the operator can do. It may be fairly simple, or it may need a technician to come in. But no matter what, we've diagnosed exactly what the problem is. And so there's no guesswork on what needs to be done to get this printer back up and running. So what I'm asking our users and anyone here on the call, if you can give us data like this in the before and then the after, and what you did to fix it for which printer, we can start feeding this into our system so that we can bring up these prompts automatically, which will help everybody in the community. We've got this information already on some different types of devices, and it can only be more and more powerful. So please continue to give us data and help us make this really intelligent print quality system for users. Here's my pre-production checklists that we mentioned. And all you have to do is in the accountability inspector, depending upon if the operator is designated as a beginner or advanced, that determines whether or not the checklist comes up. So let me demonstrate for you quickly. I'm going to go into our capture. I've already logged in as an expert, and you can see here I'm in Print Inspector, ready to print and measure for the Inca. Now, if I log out and I log in as a basic operator, so I've got Beth set up as a basic operator. When Beth comes up, it automatically says, hey, current temperature and humidity is unknown. Please check to make sure the temperature and humidity is right before you do the next step. And then I say, okay, I'm checking the temperature and humidity, it's right. Now, next thing it says is visually evaluate the print heads for clogged nozzles. So do a nozzle check, make sure the nozzles are good. Okay, yes, I've done that, they're right. Now I'm ready to do the control strip. So this pre-production checklist is only implemented for beginner users on this printing device so that they have to go through these steps to make sure the printer is in a sellable condition before they actually start measuring and printing their work. And of course, that's customizable. We can have any checklist, any order for any type of device. We have to do that today still. So you tell us what you want in the checklist in terms of the message here, and we can do that. And of course, for what type of device. And then you can also tell us whether or not you want it for a beginning, intermediate, and advanced user. So we can designate these pre-production checklists for the level of user as well. So all powerful things, again, to help you ensure you're printing sellable color. So with over 5 million measurements and counting, and your help, our goal is to make ChromaChecker the most intelligent print quality system the market's ever seen. Come to our color quality conference in January, end of January in Newport Richey. It's where I am right now. It's like 70 degrees right now. It's a cooler day today, but it was just 89 on the weekend. Great place to be at the end of February. For those of you that came last year, hope you come again. One of the people on the call here, we talked to him at the Print United show, and he said, you know, I've been to all the other conferences, and this conference is so applicable. He said it was relevant. He went back with many things he could apply instantly, where a lot of the other color conferences that many I helped plan and I was part of for 20 years, they're all theory. You get 20 different people talking about 20 different concepts. Some may relate to what you do and some don't. Think of this as almost everyone here is using ChromaChecker or will be using ChromaChecker, because just by attending this conference, you get a half year free of a print license for ChromaChecker. And a print license for ChromaChecker is $600 for a half year. To come to the conference and learn 3 days of information is $495 if you get the early bird special, which is buying it before the end of the year. So coming to the conference, you get a license that's worth more than the conference cost, and you'll know how to use it when you go back to your office. So I really encourage people to come to our conference. We've actually got a boating excursion one night for an evening activity that I'm looking forward to, and you'll have a lot of time to meet with your counterparts and other people in the industry that are doing this. Does anyone want to speak out that attended the conference last year with anything positive, negative? I'm opening it up. Anyone want to talk about the conference? You guys are shy. I know we've got a number of people that were there last year, but I guess they're not wanting to speak up too much. But I hope you guys join
Dave?
us. Yes.
We do have another question, but I didn't get in between
Okay.
you,
We
your
have time.
words. So back when you were, I think, clicking the checkbox or whatever, it says, does that record anywhere, or do you just assume that if there's a scan, they clicked yes?
Okay, so I'm thinking, is the question related to the checklist?
Yes.
Okay, so back in the checklist, if I quit out of the presentation and I go back to here, if you remember when I logged in as Beth, so I'll just log in as Beth again. Up comes the checklist. So when they go in and they check correct here, I'm not sure if this logs as an event. I have to check. You stumped me on that. I would guess we would want it to log as an event that they did check it. So yeah, ideally that should log as an event. So anything that they would do here in the checklist should log as an event so that you see that they did do it. Because the whole thing is, again, holding the operator accountable. If the operator said they did an event of checking the nozzles, and then they throw away a huge print because the nozzle was clogged, it's like, how do you hold the operator accountable? You hold them accountable by saying, hey, you said you checked the nozzle. It doesn't look like you checked the nozzle because it printed wrong, or maybe you checked the nozzle, but you need to be retrained on how to check the nozzle because you thought it was right and it was wrong. So this is what we're trying to do with ChromaChecker is help everybody become more accountable and move to a zero waste condition. There's so much waste that happens within the printing industry, which destroys your company's profitability. And our goal is to help eliminate this waste the best we can. So that's the concept that we're attempting to bring to market here. So with that, I want to do one more push to see if we can get as many people on this call at our conference. We actually have, you can go to our homepage and look at the agenda. In fact, let me just do that. If we go to the homepage and we look at the agenda of the conference, you'll see that we have full day sessions on how to correct and maintain both digital printing devices, that's one day, and conventional printing devices, that's one day. So the first 3 hours in the morning is about how to build G7 curves or how to build ICC profiles and know when to build ICC profiles and document it. And then the second half of the day is how to train the trainer, meaning how to train the trainer to train the operator to make sure the printer is running right. So here in the second day, digital printing, ensure the device is stable, create the G7 curve or profile, and then real world operator solutions in terms of train the operator on how to do this. So essentially we have 6 hours dedicated to a digital printer. And then we have the same thing for conventional printing on Thursday. So you can go back and not only have a much greater sense of how to get the printer in line, but also how to educate the operator on how to use the ChromaChecker interface to recognize when the printer's in or out, to get them to take advantage of the data and the details of the reports so that, again, they can keep that printer printing in a sellable state. And you'll see we have a lot of other sessions related to complementary issues. We've got Tim Quinn with us. We've got Dan Gillespie. We've got Larry Jones. So we got, again, a really top-notch list of presenters, including myself, who are going to be helping you on these 3 days. So with that, I'll call it the end of today's session. Thank you again for attending. And again, feel free to send us an email or any suggestions or tips on printer variation and what we need to do to better document and quantify why a printer is printing right and wrong, that we can then share with our whole ChromaChecker community. So have a great week, guys. Thanks for attending.